Hello, Shaka. My name is Linda Sarsour. I'm one of the co-founders of Until Freedom, and I've been a racial justice and civil rights activist for over 20 years. I'm born and raised in Brooklyn. I'm also Palestinian Muslim American. The Muslim part you can probably see. So I'm just honored to be here in conversation with you and really appreciate you bringing Fred Hampton to the mainstream, a very important figure to the philosophy in which we organize from.
Absolutely. No, thank you. It's an honor to talk to you. I'm also from Brooklyn, and I'm in Brooklyn right now.
Listen, I mean, I'm in Southwest Brooklyn today, so which is where I live right now. But I've actually been living in Louisville, Kentucky for 3.5 months, working on the case for Breonna Taylor, and working with Breonna Taylor's family. And just what we experienced since May until now with the Louisville Metro Police Department is, in fact, exactly what I witnessed in your film. In fact, when we watched your film, we were in Louisville, Kentucky, and to watch the kind of the surveillance. We had helicopters that were following us literally all around. We had drones. We have actually our filmmakers that were with us documented drones that followed us every single day to every location that we went to. And so again, nothing has changed, basically, is the moral of my story. Unfortunately, Black and brown organizers continue to experience the kind of legacy and the experience of people like Fred Hampton and the Black Panther Party. And so I think the movement is down. I think the film is going to help people. It's going to help us say, do you want to know what we're experiencing? Do you want to know what we're feeling? Do you know how we show up in the world and how the world reacts to us? Well, watch this film and see, because it really is so indicative of our experience today.
Wow. Not happy to hear you say that, obviously, but I am happy that you were able to watch this film and that it reflected, something that you felt was true, but also, I don't know if there's any value even to sort of seeing your life reflected back to you. And I hoped there was, for me, thinking about this movie was always about what's the gaze? Who is it for? The people that, and I even observed this just from doing test screenings, there are people who've been waiting for this movie their whole lives. And it was important to me that you all were not disappointed in what you watched. So to hear you say what you said does make me breathe a sigh of relief to some degree, because I don't do the work that you all do. I observe the work that you all do, and praise the work that you all do, and do what I can with films like this, and even financially to support the work that you all do.
It's actually funny what happened on the Capitol watching white insurrectionists. I think I was telling them this last time, and I think it's actually more important right now, but it's actually more timely now. It's like the white folks set us up for Fred Hampton, if that makes any sense. And I'm not saying they knew anything about your film or if that was part of the conversation, but it set us up to really look at Fred Hampton, who unfortunately, in comparison to some of the other kind of Black liberationists and other kind of Black power folks, he has been oftentimes contextualized in violence, and the Black Panther Party contextualized in this kind of armed, insurrection group or insurgent group. And I think with what happened and bringing Fred Hampton back to the conversation, they're not the same. Fred Hampton is not the same as these white insurrectionists. He's not the same as those who are armed in the KKK and those who believe that diversity, that believe that Black freedom takes something away from them. So I actually think there's a critical conversation that's going to emerge out of this film in this moment, because of kind of what happened. So I think now we're going to see more. I believe that we can actually, it's going to have a wider audience, maybe even more than we would have had before, because people are like, where's Fred Hampton? And then seeing Fred Hampton in the context of breakfast programs and, social service and empowerment and the response to racial inequity and racial injustice. And then you see white folks being like, I don't want to wear a mask.
And it was crazy, hearing you talk about the Capitol, because one of the things I thought about only days after was just about, this idea of radicalizing poor whites. Mm-hmm. And, essentially radicalizing them and get to actually fight for their interests as opposed to against their interests, which they've fought against their interests forever. You know, it's like they are, as I just said, I was like, you know, poor whites are the tip of the spear of white supremacy. And, you know, like, you see the events and you're like, see, you know, and that's why Fred was so dangerous. That's why, you know, and it's like I watch it and I'm like, damn, like the sophisticated, you know, the sophistication in terms of brainwashing that community has gotten so incredibly, just like powerful and complex and difficult to go up against with, like, you know, the advent of fake news and just like, you know, QAnon, et cetera, where, you know, they can completely live in an alternate reality and get further and further away. I mean, to the point where, like, I remember when the pandemic happened and I was like, well, okay, now they'll see, right? Like, it's killing you. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't have health care. You know, the people that you are invested in do not give a about whether you, your daughter, your son, your grandma lives or dies. Now you'll get it. Nah, doubling down, because the allure of whiteness is so powerful. This idea that, like, you know, I'm white and there's currency and value to that. Mm-hmm. It's astonishing how powerful that is.
I mean, I was writing that, I wrote about, you know, I know the Capitol grounds inside and outside. I've been arrested 27 times in Washington, D.C., inside of the Capitol, in the Senate Hart building, outside the Supreme Court. You name it, I've done it. And the amount of security that we have been accustomed to there, not just protesters, but really anybody. You want to go to your members of Congress's office, you're going through security. Like, there's no way around that. The Senate chambers is not even open to people who are staffers of congressional members. And the ways in which white folks were just able to go in there and hang from the ceiling and loot and do all that was, for me, you know, this is going to sound crazy, but I wanted people to watch that, because I'll tell you, if we tried that, we would have been shot dead immediately. Like, there would have been no ways around that. And I think what happened is, during this conversation, I think the reason why the film also resonated with me is because if I was living, if Tamika was living around the time of Fred Hampton, we would have been those activists that people said, don't mess with those radical folks right there. Like, and you know this, we have that in the movement now. We have folks that want to be very close to the establishment. So oftentimes they'll look at us and say, we're not with them, because we are unapologetic about going up against power structures. I don't care if you're President Obama, you're Joe Biden, you're Trump, all of you are my opponents. Until you bring my people justice, I don't care who you are, you look like me, you're from my family, it doesn't matter to us. And the movement is not all like that. And so we end up being the kind of Fred Hamptons of the world. And then we also get criminalized and maligned in our own movements, right? Because people are you know, will be like, people will they're like, well, why did you have to go to get arrested? You know, why are you creating these disturbances? Is this the way to justice? And Fred Hampton's philosophy was similar to Malcolm X's, which is by any means necessary, because your little meeting that you went and had is Black people still getting killed in the streets. Like, Breonna Taylor still did not get justice. In fact, police officers walked free for murdering Breonna Taylor. And eventually some got fired, not because of the people having those nice negotiable conversations. It's because the people that have been on the streets of Louisville, Kentucky for the last 200 days, that's how those cops got fired. And so what I think the film is also unintentionally doing, and I don't know if it was part of the thinking, but it actually mainstreams the folks like us, for people to be like, wait a minute, let me contrast here. You know, maybe Fred Hampton was onto something. You know, maybe looking at this in context. And, you know, one of the other things I wrote about is, like, those people are not protesters. Mm-hmm. They're just not protesters. The media was calling them protesters. And Fred Hampton and what Fred Hampton, even if you want to call him an armed insurrection, you want to call him someone that, you know, believed that violence could have been one of the kind of avenues towards liberation and justice. But even if you don't agree with that, it's still not equivalent to what white folks in America.
Okay, what blew my mind, I almost took a picture with my phone. I couldn't believe I walked in the kitchen, my dad was cooking, and I looked at, the news, always playing the news. I looked at the bottom of the CNN headline, it said, armed protesters storm Capitol, or armed protests expected by the FBI. I said, armed protests? What the is an armed protest? I have never heard of an armed protest in my entire life. I was like, what does that even mean?
It means white people with guns.
It means an insurrection. What are you talking? Like, armed protest planned? How are y'all? Terrorists, that'd be like if I walked downstairs and it said, terrorist actions planned during the inauguration, and they were just talking like normal. And I was like, it's bananas. It was just like astonishing. And the thing is, the snake will eat its tail in this one because they don't. I remember talking to friends damn near a year ago, just seeing like the lengths that people were going to allow this white man's ego to literally sink the world, and just the way that they were accommodating him so that they could get votes and and be reelected, and for just their little hit here, their little, and it was just like, do you all not recognize that you're empowering a demagogue and that you are? I mean, this man is going to be more powerful out of office than in office.
100%.
Far more powerful, far more. And they don't have a playbook. They don't have a plan whatsoever.
Mm-mm. They have nobody, and that's the thing, about this conversation. And Fred Hampton was really good about, kind of putting people into a perspective of nobody in power is your friend. And that's another thing that we have an issue with in the movements, that understanding that people in power work for us. They work for the people. And then there is no friendships anymore. Even if you're my father and you become a member of Congress, you are still accountable to me as your constituent and also to the constituents in your district. Or if you're the president, you are accountable to us. And I think Fred Hampton had that philosophy even, over 50 years ago. Like, he had that idea, and even post, right before he even, got assassinated, he was really rising up in the ranks, and his message started resonating, because that's what happens to all of our revolutionaries. The minute they start resonating with people outside their little circle, that's when the opposition decide that it's time for them to go, because they're too powerful for themselves. Fred Hampton became too powerful for Fred Hampton. Same thing they said about Malcolm X. Malcolm X had too much power for one man, so they had to take him out. And Marcus Garvey, and we can, the thing that Fred Hampton really illustrates also is, it doesn't matter if you're Malcolm X or Dr. Martin Luther King and you're trying to be like, let's be peaceful with everybody, or you're Fred Hampton or Malcolm X. Like, the white people don't see the nonviolent versus the violent. They see Black and brown people who are asking for the same stature and the same access and the same rights as white people. And all of that is unacceptable to white people. Mm-hmm. And so that also is illustrated in who Fred Hampton was. I mean, when I first got introduced to the film, and before I kind of did some research and knew you were like the producer of it, I was like, it's risky to try to do a film about somebody like Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton did not get the same glorification that the Dr. Martin Luther Kings of the world got. He's not someone who's remembered in all of what he brought and contributed to the movements at the time. And in a lot of spaces in academia and in spaces, in some element of our movement that are more like neoliberal and stuff, like Fred Hampton is not the guy that people are going to be like, name your ancestors, and people like Fred Hampton. People are like Dr. Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks. And I think that it is about time, and potentially setting precedent for the future, to start naming those who, like the Fred Hamptons of the world, and the continued, trying to remember Malcolm and the true Malcolm that he was, is really important, not just for educating the public about who Fred Hampton was, but again, it actually is helpful to the movements that we have right now. I've got emails from people just in the last week that were like, wow, like, I used to criticize you. I had, in 2018, I organized 600 women got arrested in the Senate Hart building around the issue of family separation. It was when we found out that the Trump administration was literally ripping babies from their mother's arms. So we brought about 1,500 women to Washington, D.C., and about 647 of those women were arrested. And it was the biggest scandal of my life. It was like, I was dangerous. I was engaging in mass civil disobedience. I was creating anarchy, all kinds of like stuff. And then now later on, and some of those people that were criticizing me were, of course, white liberals and others who are supposed to be like good on the issues, but don't like the risk averse stuff. And then, in the last week, I got like emails from 3 different people that were like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, I really am. Like, I have a different perspective on life right now. You know, what happened last week and thinking about what I had, you know, people have criticized me in the past, even people who are like kind of like my friend a little bit. And I think, and I was like, in my mind, I was thinking, listen, if it required for a white insurrectionist to go tear up the Capitol for you to see the value in what we're trying to do, because I'm fighting for healthcare, I'm fighting for law enforcement to stop killing Black people. I'm not fighting not to wear a mask, and I'm not fighting to uphold a dictatorship. Like, so let's make sure that that's not equal. And so I think Fred Hampton, his story right now in this moment is going to even further put this moment in perspective. Not just let's look back at Fred Hampton's life, but what does Fred Hampton's life mean right now? And so I'm excited about that conversation that's going to happen.
Me too. And I'm excited to hear that you feel that way, because I just, you know, I've heard it from a few folks, but a lot of, you know, like I'm reading things that people are writing and saying about it. It's not the same as like hearing it to you face to face. So that makes me proud.
One interesting thing about the film that I shared with folks on your team is it was interesting how there was a lot of it shown from the perspective of the informant. And I think what's important about that also is that it also starts answering another question about the other very pervasive usage of people of color and Black people as informants in the movement, and leveraging people's like criminal records, leveraging poverty, leveraging so many other kind of, I guess you can call weaknesses people have to turn on their own people. And it's actually part of the longstanding white supremacist infrastructure. I mean, it's like, you know, kind of the house, you know, the house slave and
exactly.
All of that.
There's a number of reasons to make O'Neal a central character in this narrative, a million. But one primary one is to create a story about the dangers of being apolitical, you know, and the dangers of prioritizing, you know, the kinds of power that this country just sells to you as power. You know what I'm saying? Fred, yeah, it wasn't like the Panthers were like, you know, we don't need money to do these things. They reached out, they had to, they needed money to, you know, perform the direct actions that they were performing, but they didn't look at money as power, whereas O'Neal did. And whereas, you know, that's what we're taught. That's what this culture in this country teaches us and embeds in us, you know.
Yep, powerful.
Like you said, even super familiar with the way he died. Whole life I knew it. I remember hearing about his name when I was a kid, knowing this is a guy who was, in my mind, shot over 100 times. That was the narrative you heard. Shot 100 times laying next to his pregnant wife. That's what you heard growing up. Nothing about how he lived. Nothing. You know, it's not like this movie gives you the details of that in any way either, but I do think it makes you want to take your phone out and learn about it.
Absolutely.